Hey Bitstocks family, it's Antonio here from the Gravity team. Today we've got some exciting news for you. We've added 4 additional trading assets to Gravity. That's right, as of this week, you can now log into your Gravity account and trade in Ethereum, Ripple, Litecoin, and EOS. Because who doesn't love having options? Although please be aware that you can only still deposit and withdraw your funds in either Bitcoin or fiat. So happy trading, catch you soon, and enjoy the podcast.
And we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another episode of the Bitstocks Podcast. I am officially back in my lovely blue couch after the team hijacked it from me as I was in CoinGeek last week, as I'm sure you would have been aware. And another individual that was actually in CoinGeek with myself, in fact, we didn't have any chance to catch up and have a conversation. But I've got none other than Stefan Matthews, the CEO of TAAL. And if you do not know who TAAL is and you're involved in the BSB space, shame on you. And if you don't not know what Bitcoin is and you're involved in the Bitcoin space, then shame on all of us because we don't have enough insight as to just how potentially influential Stefan has been in the journey. And Stefan, welcome to the Bitstocks Podcast.
You.
How are you?
Good. Nice to see you, I'll say again, Michael. And it's a shame we didn't have an opportunity to chat last week.
It is a shame. I did notice a very tall figure that you seem very influential just in your demeanor and your stance. So I was meaning to come over and properly introduce myself. But here we are. It's only a few days later. And now we've got an opportunity to chat. How did you find the event, first of all, Stefan?
I thought the event was simply outstanding. I mean, I've been involved and attended all the CoinGeek events from their very inception, and each one has progressed in a different manner. I mean, right back in the very beginning, the events were highly technical, and most of the people that attended, and was quite a small audience in the beginning, were developers or miners. But now, I mean, you saw the spectrum of attendees last week, even with the small numbers that we were able to have in the audience. They were business people.
Yeah, incredible diversity.
They were executives and business people. A few developers and
government representatives as well.
Government representatives and representatives from integrators and organizations that work with enterprise-grade clients to develop solutions and integrate solutions. So, I mean, it has been quite a journey for CoinGeek in that regard. And it was obviously wonderful to have an audience back. But it was also, I guess, a shame that we were limited to only 100 people because God knows how many we would have packed into that place if it was, open doors. Yeah. But the interesting thing, Michael, is when I caught up for breakfast on the second morning, someone mentioned to me that we had 540,000 virtual logins to the event. I heard about this on the first day. And then Jimmy, when he was on stage at the beginning of day 3, updated that and said, up until the morning of day 3, there had been 2.8 million remote virtual logins to the event. Now, those figures are obviously substantial, but you've got to be careful because, I don't know what that translates to in terms of unique logins, concurrent logins, et cetera, et cetera. But, when after 2 days of a 3-day event, you're up at 2.8 heading towards 3 million logins, that the underlying metrics, when you look at, eyeballs and unique and concurrent users, is going to be substantial.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So, yourself in relation to Bitcoin, Stefan, in fact, before we even get to Bitcoin, your journey leading up to this stage right now, what's your history Stefan? I know you're very involved in the gaming space, right?
I'll try to keep the answer to about 4 hours for you.
Give me the highlights, the strong points.
I'll be as succinct as I can.
And so, give me some juicy ones as well. Don't hide out all the juicy bits.
Well, I've done a few podcasts and interviews in recent times where I've covered this, but I'll keep it as short as possible. I first met Craig in 2005, and the circumstances around that were that I was the CIO of an online gaming company in Australia, licensed by the Northern Territory regulator, and Craig was working for an audit firm. In fact, he was a senior or head of the audit practice in Sydney for BDO, and the practice was their security and control systems, so electronic control systems. So he was brought in by the partner of BDO and introduced to me as the audit lead, and he was the senior that undertook that program for us. And so I built a relationship with him. I didn't work personally very closely with him. My team did.
Hold on, but what, just before you continue, when you say you built a relationship with him, so you just met this person. Effectively, he's a consultant that's come in as an expert. So he's very much in work mode. What's the relationship like with Craig Wright at that stage? Was it a nice working relationship? Was he very arrogant, cocksure himself, or was it just nice and easy to work with? Or what was your first impression?
Craig's gone through various phases of how he interacts with people. Craig, as you see him today, is much closer to the personality traits that Craig had in 2005.
Wow. Okay.
Obviously, there were periods in 2016, 2017 where he was under immense pressure, in the social media and so forth, and was being hounded and attacked, and of course, I think that would weigh on
anyone.
Anyone, and but today he's more like what he was then. He was very relaxed. He was very engaging. The one thing that stands out from that period of time were, my team, my guys would come to me and say, "We're asking the guy a question, but he doesn't answer it. He actually takes us through this journey." So I called him aside one day and I said, "Mate, why don't you answer their question?" And he said, "Because, Stefan, if I tell them the answer, they won't learn anything. They'll go away and do what I tell them, or they'll affect the change that I'm instructing them. But if I lead them through a journey of understanding, they'll come to the conclusion as to what the answer is. And through that process, they'll actually learn something and it will stick in their brains." So Craig he almost reminded me of a teacher, which is
I see that.
Probably not surprising, because when I reacquainted with him, and I'll get back to why there's a gap in our continuity, but when I reacquainted with him in 2015, early 2015, one of the things that he was doing, he was an online lecturer for a course, and I can't remember exactly what the course was, but it was through Charles Sturt University in Australia. And he ran a class, and I'm digging into my memory here. I think he had, I'm going to say 500 students plus in his class. And I had the opportunity to be in his office at the time when he was conducting an online class. And so he was sitting at his desk with his screens and his camera and interacting with the students, giving them a lecture. And I was on the other side of the desk just watching. And it reminded me at that time of the way Craig used to interact with my network operations team back in 2005, 2006. So, Craig by nature is a very mentoring type of person.
Absolutely.
And you even see that today, now that he's back to his old self. You see that today when he interacts with, he gives his time freely to coach and mentor people in this ecosystem.
Yeah. That's something I identified and I picked up on. I mentioned it in the podcast when he was down, that he gives a lot of people their time. He's given me an incredible degree of his time. And he does it with so many people. So definitely I resonate with, Craig definitely has been a teacher to many people and continues to be.
I think he will continue to be, because I think that's his, I think that's a real measure of, his nature and his personality. But, he and I work together. He is an auditor providing advice and helping us do our prepare for our IPO, which we completed in, I think it was second quarter of 2006. And then, as with most engagements with professional firms, there are, and especially where audits are concerned, there are follow-up programs of work that you do to bridge the gaps that were highlighted in the audit. And Craig continued to be the liaison point between the business I was involved with and BDO. And that was mainly because the partner for that practice was based in Melbourne, and myself and Craig were in Sydney, so it was easier for him to be that liaison point. And jumping forward, Craig left BDO in the latter part of 2008, and of course, something else happened in 2008, and that was the publishing of the Bitcoin Whitepaper.
Yeah.
And our relationship changed in 2008 because he then became a consultant to the organization I was with and sat as an independent advisor to our security board subcommittee. So our relationship took another direction after that. But during 2007 and 2008, Craig and I had got to know each other well enough that he used to come into the office not just on business, but to talk about personal things. And he was, during that period, very active in design of what we know today as being the Bitcoin network. And he was discussing with me repeatedly various concepts and ideas. He, on a few occasions, wanted me to fund some proof of concept work around security pieces, which, as it turned out, some of the security considerations in the Bitcoin network were things that he was bridging into other areas of technology, and he was therefore proposing that we fund some of these pilot programs to test them out. We never did. I just thought they were steps.
So, sorry, Stefan, just to put a pause.
Yeah.
So was this before there was even a name Bitcoin, right?
Yes.
So was Craig coming to you calling this Blacknet?
He definitely spoke to me about Blacknet. I can confirm that. But there were a number of other things that just didn't have names or labels. They were techniques. And all of these things I just thought were, at the time, I thought were just random scattergun ideas that he had around security. But then as we got into, the mid part of 2008, these things started to show correlations with each other. And it was, and people have asked me, well, have you got a diary entry? Can you prove what date he said this to you? Can you prove what date? No, I can't, because, if I had that level of foresight, then, we wouldn't be sitting here today. I'd own my own island. But he definitely spoke to me about a thing called Bitcoin, and he he definitely came into my office one day and handed me a USB stick and said to me, mate, on this USB stick, there's a document I want you to read. And I put it into my laptop at the time and dragged it onto my desktop and gave him the stick back. There was only one file on it that I can recall. And
how long did it take you to read that? So whatever this thing was, you didn't really know at the time.
He wanted me to read it there and then on the spot, and I didn't. I obviously had other more important things to deal with at the time, so as I thought. But I did print it, and I had it on my desk because the next time he came into my office, he saw it laying on my desk and said, "Oh, you've read my white paper?" And I said, "Yeah, I have."
What was it? What was it titled? Was it Can you remember the title of it then? Was it the same title? Was it peer-to-peer electronic cash?
It was exactly the same title, but I can tell you it did not have Satoshi Nakamoto on it. Okay. And I've seen two versions of it. One with no name on it, and one with Craig Wright on it. That were obviously versions prior to him publishing with the Nakamoto name. But he was constantly trying to get me involved in concepts around electronic cash, e-cash, digital gold-backed electronic cash, all sorts of things during probably a 6 or 7 month period from early 2008 to third quarter of 2008. And he wanted me to get involved in this project. And I said I'm not interested because I just felt that, well, I actually said to him at the time, mate, this is the greatest load of rubbish I've ever seen. It will never amount to anything. Right? And I might have used a little more colourful language than that because Craig and I are both Australians and we know how to communicate properly. So, I made my point clear.
But what made you say that though, Stefan? Was that because he was veering in the world of finance and like you could see where this affects banking and maybe a political sphere?
No, not at all.
Was it just tech? Like you just couldn't see?
I mean, you've got to remember, I was working in the world of
iGaming, right?
Yeah, online gaming. And one of the lifebloods of online gaming is money in, money out. So your e-commerce systems. And I suspect, I never asked him and I never discussed it with him, but I suspect, the reason he thought I might jump on this is because it would have significant application to streamlining e-commerce processes in online gaming, but I didn't. And I actually said I did a CoinGeek TV interview last week, and I said, over the years, I've seen so many people say that, and I've met people who've said to me, I picked up the white paper in 2010 or I picked it up in 2012 and immediately I read it and I had this light bulb go off and it was like, the most amazing thing I've ever read. Mm-hmm. And they said to me, didn't that happen to you? And I went, no, it didn't. And I think the circumstances were totally different. They didn't
Absolutely.
know Craig.
Yeah.
They didn't know Craig. Bitcoin was already a live breathing thing by the time they came across the white paper. So they had they had different circumstances.
Yeah, it's very different. It's very different. Very different.
And of course, Craig had been quacking away to me for months and months and months on end about these things and using the word Bitcoin as it got closer and closer to the white paper being published. So, when I read it, I was reading things that he'd already been quacking away to me about for months. So there was no opportunity for me to be, light bulbs to go off and me to suddenly be enlightened.
Yeah.
But then, I sometimes wonder, I look at people sometimes and I go, really, did light bulbs go off? You might say that now because you want to say that now. But and to some, that might have been what happened, but it wasn't for me.
I think most people dismissed. I dismissed it myself first time round. Got a funny story here with my interim CFO, who had an option of either buying 750, I think it's 500, it was thousands, I think like 50,000, 70,000 Bitcoins for like £750, or buy a graphics card to mine Bitcoin on eBay. Guess which one he done? He bought the graphics card in order to mine Bitcoin.
I'm going to give you a piece of information now that I haven't spoken about publicly in an interview or a podcast yet, ever.
Go for it.
So here's an exclusive. But, several dozen of my closest friends and family know this story. In 2009, and I've always maintained it was around Easter. Don't know why, but Craig came to me one day and just bowled into my office because, Craig is kind of his social interaction is sometimes a bit peculiar. And in those days, I could have four people in my office I had a glass wall at the front, and I could have the door closed, and I could be in a meeting with four people, and Craig would just open the door, walk in, sit down. And I go, mate, I'm in a meeting. And he goes, it's okay, don't worry, me. I'll just continue on. I go, mate, I'm in a meeting. Just like go away and come back when I'm finished. Yeah, fuck off, come back when I'm finished. So this one day I was sitting there by myself, and I was preparing because we had a committee meeting, if I remember correctly, and he always used to arrive early before the committee meetings to sit down and have a chat with me. And he bowls into my office, sits down, and says, mate, give me $500. And I went, $500? If you're a bit short, I'm happy to give you 1,000 or 2,000 because, I'm paying you, and I can deduct it if you run away and don't pay me back. And he goes, no, mate, I'm not short. Just give me $500 and I'll give you 50,000 Bitcoin.
Wow.
And I went, Bitcoin? And he went, yeah, Bitcoin. I went, mate, I've told you before, I don't give a shit about that. I'm not interested in Bitcoin, right? If you want 500 or you want 2,000, I'll give it to you, but I'm not interested in this Bitcoin. Now, so many people have said to me, especially close friends and family, they were 1 cent each, right? 1 cent Australian, so that's like half a penny US. So many people have said, don't you wish that you'd taken those 50,000 Bitcoin? And the answer I've always given is no, I don't, because if I had, most of what we see today wouldn't be as we see it today.
Yeah.
I introduced Craig in 2015 to Calvin.
I was just going to lead to this, but I'm glad that you touched on it. So please tell me more about that. So
the businesses that Calvin and I have developed around this technology and the partnerships that Calvin and I have in some of these areas wouldn't exist. CoinGeek wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Craig Wright in his current state wouldn't exist as he is today. And I'll explain all that. And of course, you've got to remember, I didn't give a damn about Bitcoin. And if I had given him 500 and he had given me 50,000 and a private key, what the hell would I have done with the private key? I might have tossed it in the trash. You got to remember, I moved from Australia to London and then London to the Philippines. And in the Philippines, I've moved a couple of times. That private key might still be with me. It might not. Who knows?
Dude, more than likely not. If you double your money, triple your money, you probably would have sold them. Like, hindsight, everyone's a trillionaire in hindsight.
What would I have done if Bitcoin was $200? and I had 50,000 of the bloody things.
Exactly.
You know, who knows? But what I do remember, Michael, is when I was living in London, it was a weekend and I was sitting there switching through cable TV, and a documentary came up on one channel, and it was a documentary on Bitcoin. And I'm sitting there on my sofa and I'm watching. I've mentioned this to a couple of people and they go, "Oh yeah, I remember what that was." It was a bunch of guys who were developers, and they were in caravans and tents, and they were in a forest somewhere in the US, and they were running around with their mobile phones, transferring Bitcoin to one another, running some sort of commune, right? And it was being done as a demo on how to pay for things on one of these, right? And I'm sitting there and I went, shit, this is fucking Bitcoin thing, right? And then one of my sons walked in. He said, "What are you watching?" Because he wanted to watch soccer, right? Yeah, what are you watching? Yeah. And I went, "Oh, I'm watching this thing." But I said it's a bunch of rubbish, so we'll turn it over. So we turned it over because what I was scratching my head, going, "Well, you know, some people are starting to play with this stuff, but it still didn't resonate with me that it was anything earth-shattering." That didn't occur until 2014, late 2014, when because Craig and I didn't talk to each other from when I left Australia in 2010 until he called me one day in the Philippines in 2014, late 2014. He had done some work because at this stage I'd moved to London and I was working for one of Calvin's companies as their CTO. And you know what it's like when you transfer, and you're an executive, you tend to take a couple of people with you on the journey because you're a bit of a team together. And one of the guys that was heavily interacting with Craig in Australia, and I took him to London as my network operations director. And he called me a couple of times and said, "Stefan, I've got some security things that I need to deal with, and I want to use somebody that I can trust. Do you mind if I use Craig?" And I've gone, use Craig as much as you want. I'll sign off on it. You can just do that. But I said, you manage Craig. I don't want to manage Craig because
Craig will pitch up in your meeting and sit down. That's why.
Well, not so much that, but you can say to Craig, "I've got an issue here. I want you to write me a security report about this," and he'll come back and deliver you a security report about that. And you'll go, "Craig, how did you go from this to that?"
Yeah.
And
I wonder that every time I'm in conversation with him, to be fair.
Yeah, I started on this, but I found that, and this is more interesting.
This is better. This is what you really want.
So anyway, I got this phone call. I was sitting at my desk and my mobile phone rang, and I picked it up and it was Craig Wright. And I went, "How the hell did you get my number?" And he said, "Oh, Shane gave it to me." And I went, "Oh, this is going to be good." So he said, "My friend, I got some issues in Australia, and I need some advice, and you're the only person in the world that I feel comfortable who will give me sincere and proper advice that I can trust, and I'd like to talk to you." And I said, "Well, mate, you're in luck because I need to go to Sydney sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and I've got some legal documents that have to be signed in person. So I'm coming down there on a personal trip. So I'll hook up with you and we can have a chat." Well, that 2 or 3 weeks took about 5 or 6 weeks because I had delays in the documents, and Craig got increasingly panicked and kept calling me saying, "When are you coming? When are you coming?" But nonetheless, I got there. It was during that period, I don't know why, I just thought to myself, he's going to talk to me about Bitcoin. And I Googled Bitcoin. And to my amazement, it was a totally different beast to what I even saw in London. But it wasn't Bitcoin, the electronic cash. It was the Bitcoin technology of the blockchain that took my interest then. But I fully understood, as some people didn't, because you read a lot of crazy stories about blockchain's great but Bitcoin's not, and separate the two. But I understood you can't. I understood the architecture, that you can't separate one from the other. But it was the power and the opportunity that the blockchain presented that was of most interest to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I did some research and then ended up in Sydney, and Craig and I sat there and we talked. I did my business in the morning. We met for a hamburger at lunchtime, and then I invited him to dinner that night, and we talked until about 11 o'clock. And I got to understand the full lay of the land of what was going on with his companies in Australia and the issues that he was having. And I asked him the magic question. I said, mate, I can come back and give you advice, but it's important for me to know what's important to you, because advice is only as good as it's going to be well received. And if your head is over here and I'm over here, it's not going to work. So he said to me, Stefan, in all honesty, I'm not cut out to run businesses. I've got to remember, he had 16 companies in Australia.
Wow.
And I said, why you got 16 companies? And he said, well, every concept or idea that I had for the application of this technology, I set up a separate company. So I had all these companies. And I said, what is important? And he said, I can't run companies. I don't manage people well. I'm not good with finance. I'm not good with legal. I'm not good with administration. He said, what I'm good with is inventing things. Yeah. And I just want to sit in a room and I want to invent for the rest of my life. And I want to pass those ideas off to people who can act on those, work with me to complete the definition, the white papers and everything else associated with some of my inventions, and then to actually spin up businesses to create things from them. And I said to him, I still remember saying to him, mate, as they say in the classics, be very careful what you wish for. Yeah. And I went away. I flew back to Manila the next day, and I was thinking about this in my office, because at that stage I'd left the gaming industry. Okay, I left the gaming industry in, I'm going to say, mid 2014, and Calvin had when I had made that decision, Calvin asked me down to Antigua to talk. And he and I spent about 10 or 14 days together. And what we decided is that he and I would look for opportunities to invest in businesses outside the gaming industry. Okay. So if I came up with, through my connections, opportunities that just happened to be gaming related, I would pass them back to the gaming guys. But things outside of that, he and I would look to set up businesses and operate separately.
So how did that exactly come to be? So was it a case of you guys established that you had an appetite outside of gaming, or was it a case of, I imagine it's probably all of these factors combined?
Well, it was, I definitely had an appetite outside of gaming, and Calvin had an appetite for diversification.
But at this point, Calvin didn't know Craig personally, or wasn't introduced to Craig. No. Right? So that was a connection that you established.
Yeah, well, when I got back to Manila, I was sitting there scratching my head, And you know, it's like one of those things that you go, I just have to talk to someone. You know, it's not that I was looking for advice. It was just that I needed to get this out. You know, so at that stage, I mean, Calvin was living the majority of the year in Antigua, but for a couple of months of the year, he used to go back to Vancouver, where his roots are. And he was in Vancouver, and I called him, and I said, mate, I just need to talk to someone. And he went, oh shit, this sounds good. And I said, no, it's not bad, but are you sitting down? And he goes, yeah, I am. This sounds really good. And I went, no. I said, I need to tell you a story. And I said to him, you ever heard of Bitcoin? And he went, yeah, I have. Why do you ask? I said, no, I just want to tell you a story. Do you know who invented it? And he went, no, but I think I remember some Japanese guy. And I said, well, I can tell you I know the guy who invented it, and he's not Japanese. He's actually Australian. And there was silence for a few seconds. And then he said, how do you know this guy? So I told him the full story. And then he said, how come you've never mentioned this before? And I said, because it wasn't important. It wasn't anything that was material to anything that I was doing.
Which is exactly why I'd imagine Craig trusted you the way that he did in the first place, because he probably clearly could have had a candid conversation with you and get that response. But the reason why you wanted to vocalize it and get it out to Calvin, just process it yourself. When Craig came to you, this is how, as you're piecing it together, how I'm kind of seeing the picture formalize, is you seem to have had a soft spot for Craig, not necessarily his output in terms of his technical stuff that he wanted to do. And that lasted for almost 10 years until you had, I guess, a respect for the blockchain and what he meant from a security and technical standpoint. But this guy had, I know you said on and off, but ultimately he still had 10 years of your time where you've built up a pretty special relationship. If when Craig is in a time of need, he reached out to you.
I've had a couple of people say to me, so Stefan, you and Craig were best friends. And I go, no, we weren't. And it would surprise you that the first time Craig and I ever had anything other than a cup of coffee in the office, the first time we ever interacted with each other outside the business environment was when I went to Sydney and had lunch with him and had a hamburger in early 2015.
Yeah, but Craig was quite keen, you said, for you to come over and have that conversation. And this was around the same time that Craig was having his issues with the tax office, I'd imagine.
Tax office was a major part of the problems that he had. And
do you reckon that was just due to mismanaging 16 companies and not being that way minded? Or was you seeing the picture now unfold that this guy is either under attack for what he's invented, or the attacks are very much amounting and beginning with what he's invented?
Yeah, look, I'll say that there were factions within the Australian tax office that were victimising Craig and had, I think their decisions and their actions were highly personally motivated to destroy anything Craig was associated with. Yeah. Now, was that because he was associated with Bitcoin? I think that was maybe part of it, because I don't think they fully understood what Bitcoin was at that stage anyway. Yeah. But, you know, they'd had previous run-ins with Craig. There was previous litigation that had occurred a couple of years prior to that, and it ended up in court, and Craig was successful against the tax office, and it was Bitcoin related. If I remember correctly, it was when he moved coins out of Australia, and I can't say definitely whether that transaction involved the Tulip Trust or not, but they ultimately ended up in the Tulip Trust. Okay. But there was a dispute, I believe, around the valuation of the coins at the time and what tax might be paid on them. And anyway, I'm not privy to all the details, but that's my recollection. But whatever it was, Craig won. And from that point on, there was the relationship between Craig and various people in decision-making positions within the tax office was toxic. And I would say this, if Craig was sitting next to me, there were things that he could have done that would have improved the relationship, but he didn't. He managed to, in typical Craig style, inflame the relationship. So things, when if you've got an auditor sitting in front of you and you call him a moron, that's not going to go well, is it?
Yeah, literally, naturally, that is not going to go down very well.
Yeah, which surprises me because, Craig, when he was doing audits, was probably called a moron himself. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Craig at this point, going back to what you're saying, so this is 2014, 2015. You're just on the cusp of introducing Craig to Calvin. You just articulated to Calvin what your story was in relation to Bitcoin. What
ultimately ended up occurring was that Craig and I said to Calvin, said, I'd like to meet this guy. And I said, I'd actually like you to meet him too, because I'm trying to work out what the solution is. So Craig and I flew to Vancouver a few weeks later, and we arrived on a Sunday, and Craig and I had a private dinner on Sunday evening. And then I took him to meet Calvin on the Monday morning. And, we spent a day and a half talking to Calvin. And then, Craig flew back to Australia and I flew back to the Philippines. And after that, I'd made calls to a number of people. And I flew to Australia and got into a deep dive into his situation. I spent 2 months there doing due diligence. The upshot of that was that on the 29th of June 2015, we signed a term sheet that saw the formation of N-Chain, and N-Chain was going to employ Craig. The conditions were that Craig and his family would move to the UK. Okay. That N-Chain would be formed.
Who chose the UK? Was that Craig's choice, or was UK choice as strategic location?
Craig had nothing to do with it. It was. I want to be clear at this point. At this point, Craig was not an investor in N-Chain.
Okay.
I had put together financing outside of our relationship with Calvin, but he remained vitally interested and wanted to get involved at some point, and he ultimately did. If you look at the press, a few years ago, Calvin did ultimately subscribe to a tranche of N-Chain shares. He and Craig bonded almost instantly. It was like they were on the same wavelength. Calvin is a very insightful person. So he and I immediately at that point saw what the potential was for this technology, whether it be Bitcoin, whether it be the blockchain, whether it be smart contracts, tokenization, and everything else. And you got to remember, we sat there talking about nothing else other than technology for a day and a half with Craig. And there were, things around Bitcoin being Turing complete, Bitcoin being able to do smart contracts and scripts, Bitcoin being able to handle tokens, and so on and so forth. And it was on the back of this that, we saw a world with a hell of a lot of opportunities. And so I took advice. You asked me why London. I took advice from a number of people, including Baker McKenzie. I engaged Baker McKenzie in Australia, and they worked with me. I spent 6 months then in Australia working with a team of lawyers to be able to design the Enchain group and to document the intellectual property, be able to interact between Enchain and those companies on an arm's length basis, because, I was very concerned at the time that there were still ongoing disputes with the tax office. And, despite what you might read, people amaze me. Journalists amaze me sometimes. They write stories that are just full of the greatest amount of rubbish you've
Truth?
ever.
Truth doesn't sell. Why do we need to do truth?
I mean, you pick up things. Craig's a convicted criminal, really. Craig has been charged with tax fraud, really.
That's why you always have to utilize your own discernment, Stefan. I mean, one thing that I found always very interesting is I've never had Calvin down as a silly man, for one. And anyone who achieves billionaire status clearly is not going to be a silly individual. But the more that I studied Calvin myself as an individual, had a couple interactions, and then I confirmed it myself when I eventually had dinner with Calvin, how shrewd his mind actually is. Yeah. It's always interested me as to how did someone convince a billionaire to go so in on Bitcoin, right? Because that's ultimately what happened. And I've always been very curious about their relationship and dynamics of their relationship as to how Craig achieved that with Calvin. I have never marked down Calvin as not being an insanely shrewd individual.
Let me just modify that a little bit. Calvin didn't go all in on Bitcoin. Calvin went all in on the business opportunities that could be created from this technology.
Yeah.
Because, and when I say this technology, I'm specifically referring to the true version of Bitcoin as articulated in the white paper. There are, as we know, there are other blockchains that are using, and you could say passing off on the Bitcoin name, and they are not reflective of the Bitcoin branded white paper that was released in 2008. But
Absolutely.
BSV blockchain is, and we now have untold number of examples of smart contracts, tokens, scalability, and everything else that, and Turing completeness that a number of people over the years have stood up and said are impossible. Even some of the smartest minds that existed in the old Bitcoin world said that these things were not possible. And every time Craig spoke about them, he was talking nonsense. He was a fraud. Well, guess what? They are possible and they exist today. And I have not heard anything come out of Craig's mouth in the entire time that I've known the man, even though I thought it was a bit far-fetched at the time. I've never heard anything that has not actually ended up to be true.
That's a statement. That's a statement.
Ever. And, he and I sit there sometimes, even these days, and chew the fat about all sorts of things. And I sit there going, really? And he goes, yeah, you wait. 5 years from now, this. Right? And it takes me back to a story, and I think Andrew O'Hagan, when he wrote the Satoshi Affair, I think he quoted it in there, if I'm not wrong. He said, Craig made a statement, and I was there when Craig made the statement. I designed a car, but I only delivered the wheel. Now, all the other things that have come to fruition since that statement, Turing complete, tokens, smart contracts, and all of the other things that Enchain are working on today, are all additional components of this car visualization that he had. And I suspect that, another 20 years from now, and God knows how many things will hit people's desktops in that period of time, he still won't be finished.
So you, sir, have been a clear mastermind working behind the scenes. You've made
I've been called a lot of things. Yeah. I've been called ever dependable Stefan, the reliable Stefan, man in black.
Don't get candid on me now, Stefan. You've done some clearly very significant things, making some very significant connections.
I did, and I was about to say I made a mistake in 2008 when I told Craig that this was the greatest load of shit I'd ever seen and would never develop into anything. But
that might have been exactly what he needed to hear right then, Stefan, because that might have actually given him the fuel he needed to prove maybe just you wrong, because clearly you're someone from the beginning he wanted the opinion of.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know. But what I do know is that as this has developed, I obviously have modified my views, and I'm as bullish about the opportunities for the technology in today's world as anyone on the planet. I mean, I've told the story about when I was back in Australia. I attended a conference, a CIO conference, and I had the pleasure of listening to a keynote address from Professor Clayton Christensen, who, God bless him, has passed since. But he was one of the pioneers, and he wrote 2 or 3 books in the series around innovation, Innovator's Dilemma, and others. And after I heard him speak, he worked at Polaroid during the period when digital photography came through, and Polaroid and Kodak, to their peril, failed to recognize disruption and innovation. Yeah. And I've been a student of disruption and innovation ever since. And I never thought in my lifetime that I would see something that I would classify as classic disruption and innovation, like blockchain and Bitcoin. And I thought the internet. I was reflecting after I heard Christensen speak that the internet was probably it, and then the explosion in mobile telephony and mobile network technology I thought was probably it. But those things are important because they add a foundation piece to what we see with blockchain and Bitcoin. But I think history will tell us that what Craig invented will probably be far more impacting on people's lives.
Hello, beautiful people. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Stefan Matthews. And if you did, please make sure you leave a like, comment, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. Good news is that this is actually only part 1 of a 2-part episode that we've done with Stefan. I mean, the conversation flowed so naturally. Stefan has a insightful and unique perspective in a story that is Bitcoin, to say the least. So make sure you hit the bell notification button to be notified for part 2 of this podcast. And if you want something to watch from now until then, we have plenty of other podcasts on the channel. But in relation to this episode in particular, I guess I recommend naturally watching the podcast we've done with Craig recently. And we actually had a podcast with Calvin Ayre a couple of years ago on the channel as well. And until the next time, as always, peace, love, and light. All the best.